The first thing anyone noticed about her hands were the scars. Not the obvious kind, the sort that came from kitchen accidents or fence mending. These were small, precise marks scattered across her knuckles and the webbing between her fingers, the kind a surgeon might have if surgeons regularly worked in conditions that required them to bleed. In the darkness of the covered wagon, those hands trembled as they wound white cloth around a fresh cut on her palm. The bandage work was expert economical, no wasted motion, but the trembling never stopped. Grace, as she would soon call herself, sat perfectly still otherwise. Her breathing was controlled, measured the way someone breathes when they have trained themselves not to make noise. Outside, the wagon wheels creaked over frozen ground. Inside, amber lamplight barely touched the shadows. Beside her, a small form shifted beneath a threadbare blanket. The girl was perhaps 9 years old, dark hair tangled across a face too serious for childhood. She clutched a cloth doll so worn its features had faded to suggestion. Even in sleep, her grip never loosened. Grace watched the child with an expression that belonged to no simple emotion. Love, certainly. But threaded through it was something closer to fear, or perhaps guilt. The kind of guilt that comes from knowing you have taken something precious that was never meant to be yours. She reached out, stopped herself, pulled back. This happened 3 times before her scarred fingers finally touched the girl's hair, smoothing it with a gentleness that seemed at war with everything else about her. "Almost there, little one," she whispered. The words seemed to cost her something. The girl stirred but did not wake. Her breathing changed rhythm, falling back into the deeper cadence of exhausted sleep. Children who have known real fear sleep differently. They never fully let go. Grace turned her attention to the small window cut in the wagon's canvas. Through it, the first gray suggestions of dawn were bleeding across the Arizona sky. The landscape had changed during the night. The endless flat, nothing of the desert had given way to rolling hills, then to something almost green. Juniper trees stood like sentinels. In the distance, red mesas rose against the lightening sky like ancient monuments to forgotten gods. Whispering Creek. The name had appeared on a map 3 weeks ago, circled in pencil by a man who was now dead. A man who had whispered with his last breath, "Go there. He cannot find you there. It is far enough from everything that matters, but nothing is ever far enough." The wagon jolted over a stone, and Grace's hand moved instinctively to the space beneath the seat where a Winchester lay, wrapped in oilcloth. Her fingers touched the stock, confirmed its presence, withdrew. Old habits. Older than this life she was trying to build. Older than the name Grace. Older than motherhood. Older than mercy. The wagon driver, a taciturn man named Hoskins, who asked no questions because she paid him not to, called back through the canvas, "Town ahead, 15 minutes. Grace closed her eyes, offered no reply. 15 minutes to prepare a face. 15 minutes to become someone believable. 15 minutes to bury Artemis so deep that not even she could find her. When she opened her eyes again, the trembling in her hands had stopped. Whispering Creek announced itself modestly. No grand entrance, no welcoming committee, just a scatter of wooden buildings arranged along a main street that looked like it had been carved from the red earth itself. A church steeple rose at one end, a saloon at the other. Between them, the usual frontier necessities, general store, blacksmith, livery, a building with faded letters proclaiming itself the territorial post office, and telegraph. And watching from the shadow of the sheriff's office, a man with silver hair and a face carved by wind and hard years. Sheriff Samuel Harding had seen enough strangers come and go through Whispering Creek that one more should not have registered. But something in the way this woman sat beside the wagon driver made him step out into the street. Something in the way she scanned the buildings, the roof lines, the alleys, the methodical sweep of someone cataloging escape routes. He had seen that look before, long ago, in people who wore badges that said Pinkerton. The wagon stopped in front of the general store. Hoskins climbed down, went to help his passenger. She was already on the ground before he could offer a hand, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of practice. Then she turned to lift the sleeping child from the wagon bed. That was when Samuel saw her eyes, gray, the color of gunmetal, of winter storms, of things that cut. But when she held the child, something in them softened. Not much, just enough to make Samuel wonder who this woman was running from and whether it would follow her here. She felt his attention like a physical touch, turned her head precisely 30 degrees to meet his gaze across the distance. For 3 seconds, neither moved. An entire conversation happened in the silence. "I see you. I see you too. I am not what I appear. Neither am I. Will you be trouble only if you make me?" Then the woman looked away, gathered the child closer, and walked toward the store as if the moment had never happened. Samuel touched the badge on his chest, felt its familiar weight, and made a decision he would later realize had been forming for 6 years. Since Denver, since the mission that went wrong, since a woman named Artemis disappeared with a child that was not hers, and he had told his superiors he had no idea where she went. Some debts are paid in silence. The interior of the general store smelled of coffee and leather and the particular dust that accumulates in places where people buy the pieces of their lives. Grace stood just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust, letting the space reveal itself. 2 exits, one through the front, one through the back past the storeroom. Windows on 3 walls, good sight lines to the street. She hated that she still noticed these things. The child Sarah had woken during the walk from the wagon. Now she stood close to Grace's side, one hand gripping her mother's skirt, the other still clutching the faded doll. She did not speak. Sarah had learned early that silence was often safer than words. "Help you, ma'am." The voice came from behind the counter, belonging to a man perhaps 35 years old. He wore a simple work shirt with the left sleeve pinned up just below where an elbow should have been. His face was honest in the way that frontier faces often were weathered by sun and experience into something readable, but his eyes held questions. "I am looking for lodging," Grace said. Her voice was soft, careful, with just the slightest accent that might have been Southern or might have been something educated away years ago. "Somewhere quiet. My daughter needs rest." The man studied her for a moment longer than politeness suggested. "Elijah Warren," he finally said, offering his remaining hand, "run this store. As for lodging, Widow Cole has rooms. 2 streets over White House with the blue shutters. She lost her husband and boys in the war. Takes in boarders now and then." Grace shook his hand. His grip was firm, compensating. "Thank you, Mr. Warren. I will speak with her." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Ma'am, forgive me for saying, but you look like you have traveled a long way. If you need anything, supplies, advice, even just a friendly ear, my door is open." Grace looked at him, really looked, searching for the angle, the hidden intention. But she found only genuine kindness, the frontier variety that asks no price because it costs nothing to offer. It made her throat tight with an emotion she could not afford. "That is kind," she managed. "Thank you." As she stepped back into the sunlight, Sarah tugged her skirt. "Mama, why did he look at you like that? Like what, little one? Like he has seen you before?" Grace's hand found Sarah's head, stroked once. "He has not. I promise you that." But promises made in fear have a way of becoming lies. Miriam Cole's house sat slightly apart from the main cluster of buildings, as if it had chosen solitude the way some people choose religion. The blue shutters Elijah had mentioned were faded to almost gray, and the white paint had weathered to the color of old bone. But the porch was swept clean, and the curtains in the windows were crisp. Grace knocked, waited. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, with eyes that had seen enough of the world's cruelties to recognize kindred damage when they saw it. "Mrs. Cole?" Grace kept her voice neutral, hands visible. "Elijah Warren sent me. I am looking for a room to rent." Miriam studied her, then Sarah, then back again. "How long? I do not know yet. A month, perhaps longer. I can pay in advance." "Where are you coming from?" The question was casual, but Grace heard the weight beneath it. Everyone who came to Whispering Creek was coming from somewhere, running to somewhere. The smart ones knew not to pry too deep, but they always asked once. For form's sake. "East," Grace said. "We have been traveling for some time." Running from someone or toward something, Grace met her eyes. "Does it matter?" A smile ghosted across Miriam's weathered face. "No, I suppose it does not. We all come here to forget something, Mrs. Just Grace. The Mrs. died with my past." Something in Miriam's expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or respect for a truth plainly spoken. "I have a cabin out back. Used to be a hired hand's quarters before the war took him. 2 rooms, small kitchen, its own well. Privacy, if that is what you need. It is. 50 cents a week payable each Monday. No cooking indoors after 10 at night. No livestock except chickens. And if you bring trouble to my door, you leave immediately. Those are my terms. Grace reached into her coat, produced a small leather purse. She counted out 2 silver dollars, placed them in Miriam's palm. 4 weeks, and you will have no trouble from me. Miriam pocketed the coins. Come on, then. I will show you the place. As they walked around the main house toward the smaller structure behind it, Sarah whispered, Mama, she seems sad. Grace glanced at the child, surprised. Why do you say that? Her eyes. They look like yours do sometimes when you think I am sleeping. The observation landed like a stone in still water. Grace said nothing, but her hand found Sarah's again, held tight. The cabin was simple. Honest wood, a stone fireplace, 2 rooms divided by a curtain rather than a door. The furniture was sparse but functional, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in each room. A trunk sat in the corner, dust-covered and forgotten. I will have that removed, Miriam said, noticing Grace's attention to it. No need, Grace replied quickly, too quickly. She caught herself, softened her tone. It is fine where it is. We travel light. We have no need for the space. Miriam nodded slowly. Suit yourself. Well then, I will leave you to settle in. If you need anything, I am usually in the main house until sunset. After she left, Grace stood in the center of the small cabin and allowed herself to feel something close to relief. It was not much, but it was theirs, for now. Sarah was already exploring, running her hands over the rough wood walls, peering out the window at the view of the hills beyond. Can we stay here, Mama, really stay? Grace wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise this child a home, a future, all the things she herself had never had. But promises were dangerous things. For a while, she said instead, we will see. That night, after Sarah had fallen asleep in the smaller room, Grace sat alone by the low fire. She had unpacked their meager belongings, 2 changes of clothes each, a Bible she never read but kept for appearance's sake, a small leather satchel of medical supplies, and the Winchester. And at the bottom of her travel bag, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, a metal box the size of a large book. The lock was good quality, the kind that would resist casual tampering. Grace ran her fingers over its surface, felt the familiar dents and scratches that mapped its history. Inside this box was everything she used to be, everything she was trying not to be anymore. She should throw it away, bury it, let Artemis die properly. Instead, she hid it beneath the loose floorboard she had identified within 5 minutes of entering the cabin. Old habits. 3 days passed in the careful construction of ordinary life. Grace bought supplies from Elijah's store, speaking only what was necessary. She attended church on Sunday, sitting in the back row with Sarah, listening to a sermon about redemption that felt like accusation. She nodded to neighbors who passed on the street, deflecting questions with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years building walls from polite words. And she watched, always watched. The pattern of the town revealed itself slowly. Who was important, who was not. Where people gathered, where they avoided. The rhythms of frontier life that had not changed much since she was Sarah's age, before the war, before the Pinkertons, before everything. On the 4th day, Sarah found the locked box. Grace had gone to the well for water, leaving the child to sweep the cabin floor. When she returned, arms aching from the bucket's weight, she found Sarah kneeling beside the open floorboard, the metal box sitting between her small hands. The world stopped. Put that down. The words came out harder than Grace intended, sharp as broken glass. Sarah flinched, looked up with wide eyes. I am sorry. I was sweeping, and the board was loose, and it fell, and I just put it down. The child's hands opened. The box hit the floor with a dull thud. Sarah scrambled backward, tears already forming. I did not mean to. I was not trying to. Grace crossed the space in 3 strides, snatched up the box, clutched it to her chest. Her heart was hammering, breath coming too fast. For a moment, just a moment, she saw Sarah not as her daughter, but as a threat to operational security, as a variable that needed to be controlled. Then she saw the fear in those young eyes, and something inside her cracked. Oh, God. Grace sank to her knees, set the box aside, reached for Sarah. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, little one. I did not mean to frighten you." Sarah came to her slowly, still trembling. When Grace wrapped her arms around the small body, she felt the child's heart racing against her own. "I am sorry," Grace whispered again, rocking slightly. "That box, it has things from before, from the life I left behind. Things I do not wish to remember. Bad things." Grace closed her eyes. "Necessary things, which is sometimes worse." They sat like that on the cabin floor as afternoon light slanted through the window, dust motes dancing in the beams. Mother and child, if those words could encompass the complicated truth between them. Finally, Sarah pulled back just enough to look up. "Will you ever tell me what is inside someday? When you are older? When I can explain it in a way that makes sense? Does it have to do with why we keep moving? Why you wake up at night and check the locks?" Too perceptive. Grace had known from the beginning that Sarah was unnaturally aware for her age. Trauma did that to children. It aged them in ways that could never be undone. "Yes," she said simply, because Sarah deserved at least that much truth. "Are we safe here?" Grace wanted to say yes. Wanted to promise safety the way other mothers promise sweets or new dresses. But she had made a vow long ago never to lie to this child about the things that mattered. "I am doing everything I can to keep us safe. That will have to be enough." Sarah nodded, accepting this the way she accepted everything else, with a gravity that broke Grace's heart a little more each time. That night, Grace moved the metal box from beneath the floorboard to the trunk in the corner. She did not lock it away again. Something had shifted. The past could not be buried so easily. It would always find a way back to the surface. The following week brought winter's first real cold. Frost painted the windows each morning in crystalline patterns that Sarah traced with her finger while Grace built up the fire. The town contracted inward people moving between buildings with collars raised and breath visible. Grace had begun to relax just slightly. Enough to sleep for 4 consecutive hours instead of 3. Enough to meet Elijah's eyes when she bought cornmeal and coffee. Enough to exchange brief words with Miriam about the weather, about whether the well water might freeze. Then the drifter arrived. Grace was returning from the post office when she saw him, tall, maybe 40, with the kind of lean build that came from hard travel and harder living. He sat his horse in front of the saloon with the easy confidence of a man who had business and did not care who knew it. But it was not his posture that made Grace's blood freeze. It was the way he looked at every woman who passed. Really looked. Searching faces with the systematic attention of someone working from a description. Grace turned immediately down a side street, forcing herself to walk at a normal pace when every instinct screamed to run. She circled back to Miriam's property the long way through the scrub brush and juniper, approaching the cabin from the blind side. Sarah was inside reading from a primer that Miriam had found somewhere. She looked up as Grace entered. "Mama? What is wrong?" "Nothing," Grace lied. Then, remembering her vow, perhaps something, perhaps nothing. "But we must be careful." She went to the window, adjusted the curtain so she could see out without being seen. From here she had a partial view of the main street. The drifter was no longer on his horse. He had gone into the saloon. Grace counted her breaths, remembered her training, assessed the threat level. If he was just passing through, he would be gone by morning. If he was looking for someone specific, he would ask questions. If those questions were about a woman traveling with a child, if they mentioned storm-colored gaze or surgeon's hands or anything else too specific, then she would know. And if she knew, she would have to make choices she had hoped to never make again. That evening, she did not light the cabin's lamps. They sat in darkness, eating a cold supper of bread and cheese. Sarah asked no questions, had learned long ago that sometimes Mama's fear was enough reason. Around 9 o'clock there was a knock at the door. Grace's hand was on the Winchester before the second knock came. She moved to the side of the door, positioned herself at an angle. "Who is it?" "Elijah Warren, ma'am. I apologize for the late hour." Grace hesitated, then cracked the door open, keeping the rifle out of sight. Elijah stood on the small porch, his one arm holding a covered basket. "Mr. Warren, is something wrong? May I come in? Just for a moment?" She studied him, reading the tension in his jaw, the way he glanced over his shoulder before meeting her eyes. Whatever he had to say, he did not want to say it where others might hear. Grace stepped back, opened the door wider. "Sarah, go to your room, please." The child obeyed without question. When the curtain had fallen closed behind her, Grace turned to Elijah. "Speak." He set the basket on the table. Bread, she saw, and underneath something wrapped in cloth. "There is a man in town. Rode in this afternoon. He has been asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About newcomers, specifically about a woman traveling with a young girl." "He described you both fairly well." Grace's grip on the Winchester tightened. "Did he say why he was looking?" "Said he was trying to reunite a child with her family. Said the woman took her from Denver 6 years back. Said she might be dangerous." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Grace said nothing, waiting to see which way this would fall. Elijah reached into the basket, pulled back the cloth. Underneath the bread was a revolver, Army issue, well maintained. Sheriff Samuel told him he had not seen anyone matching that description. Suggested he try the next town over, about 40 miles south. The man did not believe him, but there was not much he could do about it. Elijah paused. Samuel also suggested I bring you this. Said you might need it more than the church fund does. Grace stared at the weapon. Why would Sheriff Samuel do that? Because he is a better man than his badge requires him to be. And because I suspect he knows something about you that he has chosen not to share. Elijah met her eyes. Should I be worried, Grace? She could lie, could maintain the fiction, could send him away with reassurances and hope he believed them. Instead, she said, that depends. Are you worried about me, or are you worried about what might happen if that man finds what he is looking for? I am worried about a child who seems happy for the first time in what I imagine has been a very long time. And I am worried about a woman who looks like she has been running for so long she has forgotten what it feels like to stop. Grace felt something in her chest tighten. You do not know me, Mr. Warren. No, ma'am, I do not, but I know fear when I see it. And I know the difference between someone who has done wrong and someone who has had wrong done to them. He nodded toward the revolver. Keep it, just in case. After he left, Grace stood in the darkness for a long time, staring at the gun on her table. Finally, she picked it up, checked the cylinder, fully loaded. She thought about Samuel Harding, about the way he had looked at her that first day, about how a sheriff in a nowhere town might know to help a woman he had never met, unless he had met her before. Long ago, when she wore a different name and carried a different kind of authority, the pieces were starting to form a picture, and Grace did not like what she was seeing. The drifter did not leave the next morning. Grace watched from Miriam's kitchen window as he emerged from the boarding house, stretched, and began a slow circuit of the town. He was methodical, stopping at each business, engaging shopkeepers in conversation, looking for inconsistencies, looking for someone who might know something. You are going to wear a hole in my floor with all that pacing, Miriam said from her chair by the stove. She was mending a shirt, her fingers working the needle with practiced ease. Grace stopped, realized she had been moving without thinking. I apologize. Do not apologize. Just tell me if I should be worried. I do not know yet. Miriam set down her sewing. I lost 2 sons to a war they barely understood and a husband to the grief that followed. I have buried enough of my life that not much scares me anymore. But I will tell you this, Grace, or whatever your real name is, that little girl sleeping in your cabin deserves better than to grow up looking over her shoulder. I know that. Then stop running and start fighting, or stop fighting and disappear completely. But this halfway thing you are doing, it will get you both killed. The words hit like physical blows. Grace turned to face her. You do not understand the situation. I understand that child loves you, and I understand that love makes us brave or it makes us stupid, and sometimes it is hard to tell the difference until it is too late. Miriam picked up her sewing again. Whatever you decide, do it soon. That man will not be put off forever. Grace left without another word, crossed back to the cabin where Sarah was drawing pictures in the frost on the window. The child looked up as she entered. Is the bad man still here? Grace knelt beside her. How did you know he was bad? Because you are scared of him. You are never scared unless someone is very bad. Grace pulled Sarah close, rested her chin on top of the dark head. I need you to listen carefully. If I tell you to run to the third special place we talked about, you do it immediately. No questions, no hesitation. Do you understand? The third place is far, in the hills. I know, but you are strong, and you are smart. You could make it. Sarah pulled back, looked up with those two old eyes. What about you? I will find you. I always find you. Promise. Grace hesitated. Then, I promise to try with everything I have. It was not the promise Sarah wanted, but it was the only honest one Grace could give. That night the drifter made his move. Grace heard him coming before she saw him. Footsteps on frozen ground, the particular cadence of someone trying and failing to move quietly. She was already at the window, Winchester in hand, when his shadow fell across the cabin wall. The knock was perfunctory, aggressive. "Open up. Federal business." Grace's finger found the trigger. Federal. That word changed everything. She glanced toward the curtain where Sarah lay, hidden-mouthed the word quiet. Then back to the door. "State your business from out there." "My business is with a woman and child who were last seen in this area 6 years ago. I have reason to believe you have information about their whereabouts." "You are mistaken. I have only been here a week." "Then you will not mind opening the door so we can have a proper conversation." Grace calculated odds. He was alone, or he would have surrounded the cabin. He was fishing, or he would have already tried to force entry. He wanted confirmation before he acted. She could give him nothing. "Come back in the morning. Bring the sheriff. We can talk properly then." Silence from outside. Then, "I am losing patience, ma'am. And I am losing interest in this conversation. Leave my property or I will assume you mean me harm." "Are you threatening a federal marshal?" "I am informing a stranger who comes to a lone woman's cabin at night that he is not welcome. Whether you are truly a marshal or simply claim to be is not my concern." Another pause. Then the shadow moved away from the wall. "This is not finished." "I expect not," Grace said to the empty darkness. She kept watch until Dawn Winchester across her lap, listening to Sarah's breathing from the other room. The child had not made a sound during the entire encounter. She had learned too well. As gray light began to seep through the windows, there was another knock, softer this time. Grace recognized the pattern. "It is Samuel." She opened the door. The sheriff stood there looking older than he had a week ago, fatigue etched into every line of his face. "He is gone," Samuel said without preamble. "Rode out an hour ago, heading south like I suggested, but he will be back. Men like Jack Mercier do not give up easily." Grace absorbed this. Jack Mercier, that is his name, federal marshal out of Denver. At least that is what his papers say. But I have known men with false papers before. Samuel met her eyes. "Just like I have known women with false names." The moment stretched. Two people who had danced around the truth finally facing it directly. "I do not know what you think you know, Sheriff. I know enough. I know Denver 1878. I know the mission that went wrong. I know Artemis." He saw her flinch at the name. "And I know that child in there is not yours by birth." Grace's hand tightened on the Winchester. "Are you here to arrest me? If I was going to do that, I would have done it 6 years ago when I helped you disappear." He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "But Mercier is different. He is working for someone with resources, someone who wants that child back very badly, and if I can find you, others can too." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest you tell me the truth. All of it. So I know what I am protecting and whether it is worth the price." Grace looked at him for a long time. This man who had apparently been carrying her secret for years. This man who could destroy everything with a single telegram. But her training said trust no one, and her instincts said the same. "I cannot," she said simply. Samuel nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Then at least take this." He held out a folded piece of paper. "It is a name and address in Tombstone, a lawyer who handles difficult situations with discretion. If things go badly here, get word to him. He will know what to do." Grace took the paper, slipped it into her pocket. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I have made mistakes in my life, big ones, and maybe helping you is a way of making one of them right." He turned to leave, then paused. "Artemis was one of the best, cold, efficient, deadly. But that woman who stood between Mercier and that child last night, she was not Artemis. She was a mother. And that is why I am betting on you. After he left, Grace sat heavily in the chair by the cold fireplace. Her hands, those scarred hands, were shaking again. Behind her, the curtain moved. Sarah emerged still in her nightdress, the faded doll clutched tight. "Mama, who is Artemis?" Grace looked at her daughter, this child who was not her child, this responsibility she had not chosen but could not abandon. And she knew the time for half-truths was ending. "Sit down, little one. There are things you need to know." The next evening, as purple dusk settled over Whispering Creek, Elijah Warren climbed the stairs to his small living quarters above the general store. He was tired, his shoulder aching from the phantom weight of an arm that had been gone for 3 years. He wanted nothing more than whiskey and sleep. Instead, he found a visitor waiting. Jesus! He jumped hand instinctively, going to where a weapon used to hang. "You cannot just—" Then he saw what the man held, and his words died. It was a photograph, old and faded, taken in 1878, according to the date stamped in the corner. 6 people in military-style uniforms, all wearing badges that said Pinkerton Detective Agency, 5 men and 1 woman. The woman stood in the center, her storm-colored gaze staring directly at the camera with an intensity that transcended the photograph's age. Even in sepia tones, those eyes seemed to see through everything. "Where did you get this?" Elijah's voice came out strangled. The visitor was an older man, perhaps 60, with the careful movements of someone who had survived long enough to be cautious. "From my brother's belongings. Thomas Warren, your brother. He served with the Pinkertons from 1876 to 1879, died in Denver during an operation that went bad." Elijah sank into his chair. "Thomas has been dead for 6 years. Why are you bringing this to me now?" "Because the woman in this photograph is in your town, living under the name Grace. And because Jack Mercier is looking for her, and because you deserve to know what you are getting into if you help her." The visitor pointed to the woman in the photograph. "This is Charlotte Dunn, codename Artemis, the Pinkertons' most effective operative. She could track anyone, infiltrate anywhere, eliminate any target. They called her the Ghost because by the time you knew she was there, you were already dead." Elijah stared at the image, trying to reconcile it with the quiet woman who bought coffee and cornmeal in his store, who spoke softly and moved carefully and looked at her daughter with such desperate love. What happened in Denver? An operation to protect a federal witness and her child. The witness was the daughter of a powerful man, someone with enough reach to corrupt local law enforcement. The Pinkertons were hired to keep her safe until she could testify. The visitor's voice went flat. But someone betrayed the safe house location. 4 agents died. The witness died. And Charlotte Dunn disappeared with the child. Why would she do that? That is the question, is it not? The official report says she went rogue, kidnapped the child for unknown reasons. But Thomas, before he died, he told me something different. He said Charlotte tried to save them all, that she made a choice in the moment, a choice between following orders and saving a life. Elijah looked up sharply. What choice? To let the child become exactly what her mother was running from, or to take her and run. The visitor stood, moved to the window, looked out at the darkening street. The man who wanted that witness dead is a senator now, very powerful, very connected, and he has never stopped looking for the one loose end that could destroy him. The child, the visitor confirmed. And Charlotte Dunn is the only thing standing between that little girl and a grave. Elijah sat in silence, processing this. Finally, "Why tell me this?" "What do you want?" The visitor turned back. "I want you to understand what is coming. Mercier is just the first. There will be others. And when they come, you need to decide, are you willing to stand with a woman who broke every law to do what she thought was right? Or are you willing to let that child pay for her mother's sins? Grace is not her mother. No, but she is the closest thing that girl has. And sometimes that is what matters most." After the visitor left, Elijah sat alone with the photograph. He studied each face, trying to imagine the people they had been. His brother, young and idealistic, believing in justice. Charlotte Dunn, already hard, already dangerous, and he thought about Grace, who jumped at loud noises and never sat with her back to a door and looked at her daughter like she was the only good thing left in a world gone wrong. The photograph showed him who she had been. But the woman buying coffee in his store, that was who she was trying to become. Elijah made his decision. Grace could not sleep. She had told Sarah some of the truth, not all, not the parts about blood and violence and the things Artemis had done in the name of justice. But enough that the child understood they were in danger, enough that she understood Grace had made a choice long ago, and they were still living with the consequences. Sarah had listened without crying, had asked only one question: would you do it again? Would you take me again? And Grace had answered honestly, every time. Now, in the deep hours before dawn, Grace sat at the small table with a lamp turned low. In front of her lay the contents of the metal box, spread out like pieces of a life she had tried to leave behind. The Pinkerton badge tarnished, but still readable: Agent Artemis Charlotte Dunn. A locket containing a photograph of a woman who looked nothing like Grace, but everything like Sarah. Margaret Blackwell, age 26, 3 weeks before she died. A letter creased and stained, the ink faded but still legible. Charlotte, if you are reading this, I am already dead. I know what is coming. My father will not let me testify. He will not let me take his granddaughter and disappear. So I am asking you to do what I cannot. Take Emma. Raise her far from all of this. Do not let them make her into what I was, a pawn in powerful men's games. Give her a life, a real life. I am trusting you with the most precious thing I have. Do not let me down. Margaret. Grace's fingers traced the words. She had read this letter 1,000 times, memorized every loop and curve. It was her absolution and her condemnation, the proof that she had done the right thing and the evidence that she had committed an unforgivable crime. She looked toward the curtains separating her from Sarah's room. The child's breathing was even peaceful. She had adjusted to their life with remarkable resilience. Children were more adaptable than adults gave them credit for. They could survive almost anything, but they should not have to. Grace gathered the items, started to return them to the box. Then she paused, looked again at the badge, ran her thumb over the raised letters of her code name: Artemis, the huntress, the killer. She had been good at it, better than good, the best the Pinkertons had ever seen. No hesitation, no mercy, no attachments. Every mission completed, every target eliminated, every objective achieved. Until Margaret Blackwell looked at her with dying eyes and whispered, "Save her." 2 words that changed everything. Grace stood, walked to the fireplace, knelt before the dying embers. She held the badge over the coals, feeling the heat on her fingers. It would be so easy. Drop it in, let it melt, destroy the last physical evidence of Artemis. But something stopped her. Not sentiment, not nostalgia, but the cold, pragmatic knowledge that she might need to become Artemis again, just one more time, to protect what she had sworn to protect. She pulled the badge back, returned it to the box, locked it all away. Tomorrow she would speak with Elijah, would try to understand what he knew and how much danger they were truly in. Would make a plan, because plans were what Artemis did best. Tonight, she was just Grace. A woman who loved a child who was not hers and would burn the world down before she let anyone take her. The distinction was important, even if it was becoming harder to remember where one ended and the other began. As the first gray light of dawn touched the window, Grace finally allowed herself to sleep. 3 hours, that was all she needed, all she could afford. In her dreams she was running through the streets of Denver, a child in her arms, gunfire echoing off buildings. Margaret's blood on her hands sticky and warm. A voice behind her shouting, "Artemis, stand down. That is an order." But she kept running, because some orders were meant to be broken, and some promises were worth keeping no matter the cost. Dawn came cold and unwelcome. Grace stood at the cabin window, watching frost patterns dissolve under weak sunlight, when she heard the footsteps. Single set, measured pace. Someone who wanted to be heard approaching. She had the Winchester in hand before the knock came. "It is Elijah Warren. We need to talk." Grace opened the door just wide enough to see him clearly. He looked like he had not slept, dark circles under his eyes, his remaining hand clenched at his side. In his other hand, the pinned sleeve, he carried something wrapped in oilcloth. "It is early, Mr. Warren." This could not wait. He glanced past her into the cabin. "Is the girl awake?" "No." "Good. Because what I have to show you will change everything." Grace studied him for 3 seconds, reading the tension in his jaw, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. Whatever he carried had shaken him badly. She stepped back, allowed him entry. He moved to the table, unwrapped the oilcloth with his single hand, a practiced motion. Inside was a photograph, old and faded, mounted on stiff backing. Grace felt the floor tilt. 6 people in Pinkerton uniforms, 1878, stamped in the corner. She knew this photograph, had destroyed her copy years ago, burned it along with every other connection to that life. But here it was risen from ashes, like a ghost she could not escape. And there she was, center frame, gray eyes staring at the camera with an intensity that transcended time. Charlotte Dunn, Agent Artemis, the woman she used to be. "Where did you get this?" Her voice came out flat, emotionless. The Artemis voice. "A visitor brought it to me last night. Said my brother served with the Pinkertons. Said he died in Denver during the mission that went wrong." Elijah pointed to one of the men in the photograph, young and earnest-looking. "Thomas Warren. He was 23 when this was taken, 24 when he died protecting a witness your agency failed to save." Grace stared at the face. Thomas Warren? She remembered him. Eager, idealistic, talked too much about justice. He had been the first one shot when they breached the safe house. Had bled out in her arms while she tried to stop the hemorrhage and failed. "I am sorry about your brother." "Are you?" Elijah's voice held an edge she had not heard before. "Or is that just something you say, something Artemis was trained to say to make people trust you?" Grace met his eyes. "Your brother died trying to protect an innocent woman and her child. He died doing the right thing. That is worth more than any apology I could offer. The visitor also told me why you disappeared, why you took the child." Elijah leaned against the table. "He said there were orders to surrender the girl to her grandfather, said you refused, said you went rogue." "That is one version." "What is the other version?" Grace moved to the window, looked out at the quiet town beginning to wake. A dog barked somewhere. Smoke rose from chimneys, ordinary life unaware of the extraordinary danger moving through it. "The other version is that Margaret Blackwell, the woman we were protecting, knew her father would kill her before he let her testify. Knew he would take her daughter and raise her to be another pawn in his political games. So she made me promise." Grace's hands tightened on the window frame. "She made me promise to take Emma to hide her, to give her a life far from all that corruption." Emma. That is Sarah's real name. That was the name her mother gave her. "Sarah is the name I gave her when we ran. A new name for a new life." Behind them, the curtain moved. Both adults turned. Sarah stood there in her nightdress, the faded doll hanging from one hand, her gray eyes enormous in the dim light. "I want to see the box." Grace's heart stopped. "Sarah, go back to bed." "No." The child's voice was quiet but firm. "You talk about me like I am not here, like I do not get to know my own story. I want to see the box. I want to know the truth." Elijah looked between them, understanding dawning. "She does not know. She knows enough. Enough for you to decide, not enough for her to decide." Sarah crossed the room, stood before the trunk in the corner. "It is in here, is it not? You moved it after I found the hiding place." Grace wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain control to protect Sarah from truths too heavy for a child's shoulders. But she had learned over 6 years that Sarah was not really a child anymore. Trauma had aged her, made her wise in ways that could not be undone. "Yes," Grace said quietly. "It is there." Sarah knelt, opened the trunk, pushed aside blankets until she found the metal box. The lock had been broken since that day. She found it under the floor. Now she lifted the lid with steady hands. The badge came first. Sarah held it up, tilted it in the lamplight. "Artemis, that is the name the sheriff said. That is who you really are. That is who I was." Next the locket. Sarah opened it, stared at the photograph inside. A woman who looked nothing like Grace, but everything like an older version of the girl holding the locket. Dark hair, strong features, and those same gray eyes. "This is my real mother." Not a question, a statement. Yes, Margaret Blackwell. She loved you very much. And this, Sarah held up the letter, the paper stained and creased from years of handling. Grace took it, her hand suddenly unsteady. This is what she wrote before she died. Her last words, her last wish. She read it aloud, every word a knife. When she finished, the cabin was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Sarah sat very still, absorbing this. Finally, so you stole me, not because you wanted a child, but because she asked you to. The words landed like stones. Grace knelt before her, desperate for the child to understand. At first, yes, I took you because I had made a promise. But Sarah, somewhere in those first weeks, as I fed you and changed you and kept you safe, you stopped being a duty. You became mine, not by blood, but by choice, by love. But I am not really yours. You are more mine than anything in this world has ever been. Tears finally came sliding down Sarah's young face. My real mother. Did she suffer when she died? Grace thought about lying, about offering comfort, but she had promised truth. Yes, but not for long. And her last thought was of you, of keeping you safe. That is what I saw in her eyes. Sarah looked at Elijah, then back to Grace. And the man who is looking for us, the one who made everyone die. Senator Thomas Blackwell, your grandfather by blood, the man who ordered your mother's death to protect his political career. He wants me back. Yes. Why, if he wanted my mother dead, why does he want me alive? It was Elijah who answered, his voice gentle. Because you are evidence, child. You are the one person who could connect him to the crime. As long as you exist, as long as you might remember or might talk, you are a threat to him. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes, and with it, a fear Grace had tried so hard to keep at bay. So he wants me dead, too. Not if I can help it, Grace said fiercely. Not ever. Sarah closed the box, set it aside, and threw her arms around Grace's neck. They held each other as morning light filled the cabin, two people bound not by blood but by sacrifice and choice and a love that had grown in the spaces between running and hiding. Elijah quietly rewrapped his photograph, preparing to leave them to their grief and their relief. But before he reached the door, Sarah's voice stopped him. Mr. Warren, your brother, in the photograph, he looks kind. Elijah turned surprised. He was, very kind. I am sorry he died protecting me, even if I do not remember it. Something in Elijah's expression softened. He would have been glad to know you grew up safe, that his death meant something. He looked at Grace. I will help you, however I can. My brother died for this. I will not let it be for nothing. After he left, Grace helped Sarah dress for the day, braiding her hair with careful fingers. As she worked, Sarah asked the question Grace had been dreading. What happens now, Mama? Grace tied off the braid, turned the child to face her. Now we prepare. Because the man who came asking questions, he will be back, and next time he will bring more than questions. Are we going to run again? Grace thought about that, about the cabin that had started to feel like home, about Miriam and Elijah and even Sheriff Samuel, people who had become something close to friends, about a life that was almost normal, almost peaceful. No, she said, surprising herself with the certainty. No more running. This time we stand. Marshal Jack Mercier returned to Whispering Creek 3 days later, and he did not come alone. Grace watched from Miriam's second-story window as they rode in. 6 men, all armed, all wearing the casual confidence of those who believe law and violence are the same thing. Mercier led them, sitting his horse with military precision. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Samuel emerged slowly, deliberately, making them wait. The conversation was too distant to hear, but Grace could read body language well enough. Mercier was done with patience. Samuel was standing firm. How many? Miriam asked from behind her. 6, including Mercier. Probably more coming. And you are sure you want to do this? You could take the girl and disappear tonight. I have a wagon supplies. You could be 50 miles away by dawn. Grace turned to face her. Over the past days, she had told Miriam some of the truth. Not all, but enough that the older woman understood the stakes. I spent 6 years running, teaching Sarah that safety means always being ready to abandon everything. I will not do it anymore. She deserves roots. She deserves to know that sometimes you stand and fight for what matters. Miriam nodded slowly. Then I suppose we should call that town meeting, Samuel suggested. Let people hear both sides before they make up their minds. You think they will side with us against a federal marshal? I think people in frontier towns understand that federal authority is only as righteous as the men wielding it, and I think they can see that child is happy and safe with you. Miriam moved to the window, stood beside Grace. But I will not lie. Some will want to follow the law, no matter what their hearts say. This town will divide over this. I know. And you are prepared for that. Grace thought about Artemis, about the cold certainty with which she had once operated, about how easy it would be to eliminate 6 men under cover of darkness to solve this problem the way she had once solved all problems, with precision and violence and no witnesses. But that would prove Mercier right, would prove she was the dangerous criminal he claimed, would teach Sarah that might makes right. I am prepared to do this the hard way, Grace said, even if the easy way is calling to me. Miriam smiled grimly. Good, because the hard way is the only one worth taking. The town meeting was held that evening in the church, the only building large enough to hold Whispering Creek's 200 souls. Grace arrived early, with Sarah choosing a seat in the back where she could watch the doors. Old habits. People filed in slowly, casting curious glances at the woman who had become the center of their town's first real crisis. Grace recognized most of them now. The blacksmith who had shot her horse, the seamstress who had mended Sarah's dress, the family who sat in the pew ahead of them each Sunday. Ordinary people about to be asked to make an extraordinary choice. Marshal Mercier entered with his men, taking positions around the room with tactical precision. He wore his badge prominently, making sure everyone saw it. Federal authority bright and unquestionable. Sheriff Samuel came last, moving to the front of the church. He looked older tonight, worn down by the weight of what was coming. Folks, he began, voice carrying to the back, I will not waste time. We are here because Marshal Mercier has made a serious accusation against one of our newer residents. I think it is right that everyone hears both sides before decisions are made. Mercier stepped forward. Thank you, Sheriff. I will be brief. 6 years ago, a federal witness named Margaret Blackwell was murdered in Denver while under Pinkerton protection. Her daughter, Emma Blackwell, was taken from the scene by a rogue agent named Charlotte Dunn. That agent is currently living in this town under the name Grace, and the stolen child is with her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People turned to stare at Grace, at Sarah, the child pressed closer to her side. I have legal documents, Mercier continued, holding up papers, authorizing me to take custody of Emma Blackwell and return her to her lawful family. I also have a warrant for Charlotte Dunn's arrest on charges of kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and murder of federal agents during her escape. The murder charge was new, a lie, but effective. The crowd's murmur grew louder, more agitated. Samuel raised a hand for quiet. Grace, do you want to respond? Grace stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room on her. She had faced down armed criminals without flinching, had completed missions that would break most people. But standing before this congregation of ordinary citizens, asking them to believe her, terrified her in a way violence never had. My name is Charlotte Dunn. Everything Marshal Mercier said about my identity is true, but the circumstances he describes are lies built on half-truths. She kept her voice steady, clear. Margaret Blackwell was not just a witness. She was the daughter of Senator Thomas Blackwell, one of the most powerful men in the Western Territories. She discovered her father was involved in corruption, embezzlement, and murder. When she threatened to expose him, he had her killed. That is slander, Mercier interrupted. Senator Blackwell is a respected... He is a murderer. Grace cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. I was there when his hired men broke into the safe house. I watched 4 of my fellow agents die. I watched Margaret Blackwell bleed out on the floor, and with her last breath she begged me to save her daughter from the same fate. The room had gone completely silent. So, yes, I took Emma. I changed her name to Sarah. I ran with her, hid her, raised her as my own. Not because I am a criminal, but because I knew if I handed her over to federal custody, she would be returned to the man who murdered her mother. The man who would silence the only witness to his crime. A woman in the 3rd row stood. Grace recognized her as the schoolteacher, Miss Porter. But how do we know your version is true? You admit you broke the law. How do we know you are not just a kidnapper making excuses?" It was a fair question. Grace had no answer that would satisfy everyone. Then Sarah stood up. The 8-year-old child stepped into the aisle, her small frame dwarfed by the surrounding adults. But when she spoke, her voice carried a gravity that silenced every whisper. "I remember my first mother." The room held its breath. "I remember her smile. I remember her singing to me, and I remember the night she died. I remember the loud noises and the scary men and the blood." Sarah's voice never wavered. "This woman, the one you call Charlotte, she is not the one who took me. She is the one who saved me." She turned to face the congregation fully. "My first mother gave me life, but the woman standing beside me, she gave me a reason to live it. She taught me to read and to be brave and to know that family is not just blood. It is choice." Sarah looked directly at Mercier. "You say you want to return me to my lawful family, but my grandfather killed my mother. Why would I want to go to him?" "Child, you have been fed lies," Mercier said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You cannot possibly remember." "I remember everything." Sarah's gray eyes, so like Margaret's, so like Grace's, held his without flinching. "And I choose to stay with my mother, the one who has earned the right to call herself that." She sat back down, and the church erupted. Some people stood shouting that the law was the law and must be followed. Others argued that a child's testimony mattered. Still others demanded proof, evidence, something more than competing claims. Through it all, Grace kept her hand on Sarah's shoulder, grounding herself in the only thing that mattered: this child. This fierce, brave child who had just risked everything to speak truth. Elijah's voice rose above the chaos. "I have a question for the marshal. If Senator Blackwell is so concerned about his granddaughter's welfare, why has he not come himself? Why send armed men instead of family?" Mercier's jaw tightened. "The senator is a busy man. He is a coward," Samuel interrupted, standing from where he had been sitting quietly. "A coward who sends others to clean up his crimes while he maintains plausible deniability." "Sheriff, you are out of line." "No, Marshal, I am finally in line. I was there in Denver. I commanded the Pinkerton detail that was supposed to protect Margaret Blackwell. And I know what you will not admit. We were betrayed from the inside. Someone told Blackwell exactly where we were hiding his daughter, someone with federal connections." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mercier's hand moved toward his gun. "You are accusing me of—" "I am accusing your employer, the man whose badge you wear while pretending to serve justice." Samuel's voice was steel. "And I am saying that as long as I am sheriff of this town, you will not take that child without proof that her grandfather's intentions are honorable. I have legal authority, and I have moral authority. In this town, on this frontier, we respect both. But when they conflict—" Samuel looked at the assembled townspeople. "We choose the one that lets us sleep at night." The vote was not formal, not official. But when Samuel asked who stood with Grace and Sarah, roughly half the room rose. When he asked who believed Mercier should be allowed to execute his warrant, the other half stood. A town divided exactly as Miriam had predicted. Mercier smiled, cold and satisfied. "Then I suppose we are at an impasse, Sheriff. But impasses do not last forever. I will return with sufficient force to execute my duty, and when I do, anyone who stands in the way will be guilty of obstruction of federal law." He gestured to his men, and they filed out. But at the door he turned back to Grace. "I know what you are, Artemis. I know what you are capable of. But there are 6 of us now. Soon there will be more. And when we come, not even your skills will be enough." Enough. After they left, the church slowly emptied. Some people touched Grace's shoulder in support as they passed. Others avoided her eyes. The division would leave scars on the community Grace knew, but at least it was an honest division based on truth rather than lies. Miriam was the last to approach. "You should know several of the men are organizing. They want to help defend you if it comes to that." Grace looked at the older woman, really looked. "Why are you doing this, helping us? You barely know me." Miriam was quiet for a long moment. "I told you I lost my sons. What I did not tell you is how. They died in an Apache raid defending a family they did not even know. strangers who had just arrived in the territory. Her voice went rough. I was angry for years. Angry they died for people who were not worth it, who left the next week anyway. But then I realized something. My boys died because they believed some things were worth protecting, even if it cost them everything, even if the people they protected never thanked them. She met Grace's eyes. You are giving Sarah the same thing my sons gave those strangers, a chance. That is worth protecting. It will come to that, Grace said quietly. Mercier is not the type to give up. Neither are you, I suspect. Grace looked down at Sarah, who was holding her hand tightly. No, not anymore. 2 days later, a telegram arrived for Marshal Mercier at the boarding house. The telegraph operator, a nervous man named Polk, who owed Samuel a favor, made a copy before delivering it. He brought it to the sheriff's office just after midnight, pressing the paper into Samuel's hands with trembling fingers. I should not be doing this. If anyone finds out, no one will find out, Samuel assured him. You have my word. After Polk left, Samuel read the telegram 3 times each, reading, making his blood run colder. Artemis confirmed, stop. Senator authorizes termination. Stop. Civilian casualties acceptable. Stop. Make it look like crossfire. Stop. Blackwell. He walked through the dark streets to Miriam's house, where Grace was staying close now, sleeping in a chair by Sarah's bed each night. When Miriam let him in, one look at his face told her everything. Wait, Grace, she needs to see this. Minutes later, they sat in Miriam's kitchen, lamplight throwing shadows across the telegram's damning words. Grace read it once, her expression never changing, but her hands, those scarred hands, tightened until the knuckles went white. They are not coming to arrest me anymore, she said quietly. They are coming to kill us both. Make it look like I resisted, like Sarah was caught in the crossfire. Clean, simple, no witnesses to contradict their story. Can we stop them? Miriam asked. Grace was silent for a long moment. Then, stopping them was never the question. The question is, how many innocent people die in the process? She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the sleeping town. Good people. Flawed people. People who had shown her more kindness in 2 weeks than she had known in 6 years. I could leave tonight, she said. Take Sarah and disappear. Let Mercier search empty buildings while we put distance between us. But you will not. Samuel's voice held certainty. No, because running does not end this. Blackwell will keep sending people, will keep hunting us. The only way to end it is to expose him so thoroughly that he cannot survive the scandal. Grace turned back to face them. Which means we need evidence, real evidence, something that connects him directly to Margaret's murder and to this termination order. The telegram is a start, Miriam offered. It is not enough. It does not mention Margaret, does not explicitly admit to anything except targeting me. A good lawyer could spin it as legitimate law enforcement action against a dangerous fugitive. Grace began to pace, and Samuel recognized the shift in her demeanor. This was not the frightened mother anymore. This was Artemis, analyzing a problem with cold tactical precision. We need a confession, on record, witnessed by someone beyond reproach. How do you propose getting a United States Senator to confess to murder? Samuel asked. Grace smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. By giving him exactly what he wants, or making him think we are. She laid out her plan in careful detail. It was risky, borderline suicidal, and required perfect timing. It also required trust in people she had known for less than 3 weeks. When she finished, Miriam and Samuel exchanged glances. You are asking us to bet everything on this working, Miriam said. I am asking you to help me protect a child who has already lost too much. If it fails, the blame falls on me. I will make sure of that. Samuel stood, held out his hand. Your brother Thomas believed in doing right, even when it cost him everything. If he could trust you with his life, I can trust you with mine. Grace shook his hand, feeling the weight of that trust settle on her shoulders. After Samuel left to make preparations, Miriam touched Grace's arm. There is something you have not said. Something you are planning that you did not include in that careful explanation. Grace met her eyes. I do not know what you mean. Yes, you do. I see it in your face. You are planning to do something that you think will protect us from the consequences, something that probably involves you not surviving this. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Grace said, "If it comes to that choice between my life and Sarah's future, there is no choice at all." "And what does Sarah think about that plan?" "Sarah will not know until it is too late to stop me." Miriam gripped her arm tighter. "Listen to me. That child has already lost one mother. Do not make her lose another just because you think sacrifice is the same as love. What if it is the only way? Then you find another way. Because Charlotte or Grace or whatever you want to call yourself, you taught that girl something important when you saved her. You taught her that one person refusing to give up can change everything. Do not unteach that lesson by giving up yourself." Grace looked away, unable to meet those knowing eyes. "I will try. Try harder." The next morning, Grace did something she had not done in 6 years. She wrote a letter to the Pinkerton agency, not to the Denver office which had been compromised, not to the regional headquarters which Blackwell likely had connections to, but directly to the director in Chicago, a man named Cassidy, who had recruited her personally and who had once told her, "If you ever need help, real help, you reach out directly. No intermediaries." The letter was brief, factual, devastating. Director Cassidy. "This is Agent Charlotte Dunn, code name Artemis. I am writing to report a conspiracy involving Senator Thomas Blackwell of Colorado, Marshal Jack Mercier, and unknown federal officials. In 1878, I was ordered to protect Margaret Blackwell and her infant daughter, Emma, from the senator's retaliation for her intention to expose his criminal activities. The safe house was compromised from within. 4 agents died. Margaret Blackwell was murdered. I took the child and disappeared per the mother's dying request. Senator Blackwell is now attempting to eliminate both the child and myself to prevent testimony. Marshal Mercier has received orders to authorize termination with acceptable civilian casualties. I have evidence. I have witnesses. I have a plan to force confession. But if this letter reaches you, it means I have failed. It means I am likely dead and a child named Sarah needs immediate extraction and protection. Her life is worth more than the law I broke to save it. I hope you agree. Attached are coordinates for Whispering Creek, Arizona territory and the names of civilians who can verify this account. Charlotte Dunn, Agent Artemis. She sealed it, addressed it, walked it personally to the telegraph office. Elijah had arranged for it to be sent as encoded telegram, expensive but untraceable to casual intercept. As she handed it over, the operator said, "Ma'am, there is a reply telegram for you. Came in this morning." Grace took the paper, read Senator Blackwell arriving, Whispering Creek, February 8th. Stop. Personal supervision of retrieval. Stop. Prepare accordingly. Stop. Mercier. Her blood turned to ice. February 8th was 3 days away. Blackwell was coming himself. The careful politician who never dirtied his own hands, who always maintained distance from his crimes. He was coming to personally oversee the murder of his granddaughter, which meant he was desperate. Which meant he knew time was running out, that exposure was coming. Which meant he would take risks he normally never would. Grace folded the telegram, slipped it into her pocket, walked calmly out of the office, down the street, around the corner, to where no one could see. Then she leaned against the wall and allowed herself 10 seconds of pure fear. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for the confrontation she had been avoiding for 6 years. 3 days to become Artemis one last time, not for revenge or duty, but for love. She thought about Sarah asleep in Miriam's house, about the life they had almost built here, about ordinary mornings and quiet evenings and all the small mercies of a normal existence. Then she pushed off the wall, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward Elijah's store. There were preparations to make, weapons to acquire, people to position. Because in 3 days, Senator Thomas Blackwell would learn what every enemy of Artemis had learned too late. Some ghosts cannot be killed. They can only kill you first. The plan came to Grace in the hours before dawn, when Sarah's breathing was steady and the world outside held its breath between darkness and light. It was not the plan Artemis would have made. Artemis would have positioned snipers, prepared escape routes, eliminated threats with surgical precision before they knew they were targets. Clean, efficient, permanent. But Grace was not Artemis anymore. Or perhaps she was something more complicated, something that had learned mercy without forgetting how to be merciless. She sat at the small table lamp turned low, sketching positions and timing on a sheet of paper, the mathematics of confrontation. But instead of calculating kill zones, she was calculating witness angles. Instead of planning eliminations, she was planning exposure. "You are going to surrender me, are you not?" Grace's hand stilled. She turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway, the faded doll hanging from one hand. The child's eyes held no accusation, only understanding. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough." Sarah crossed to the table, looked down at the sketches. "You are going to tell them you will give me to the marshal. Make everyone gather to watch. Then something happens. Something that makes them see the truth." Grace studied her daughter, this 8-year-old child who read strategy like other children read storybooks. "When did you become so clever?" "I had a good teacher." Sarah climbed into the chair across from her. "Will it work?" "I do not know. It depends on many things going exactly right." "And if they do not go right?" Grace reached across the table, took Sarah's small hand in her scarred one. "Then I need you to promise me something. If I tell you to run, you run. You go to the third place we talked about. You wait there for 3 days. If I do not come, you open the box and follow the map inside. It will take you to people who will keep you safe." "Without you?" "If necessary, yes." Sarah's fingers tightened. "I do not want to be safe without you." "I know, little one. But sometimes we do not get what we want. Sometimes we only get what we can protect." Grace pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, cheap soap and wood smoke, and innocence. "But I will do everything in my power to come back to you. That is my promise." They sat like that as dawn began to paint the windows gold. Mother and daughter bound not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice made and remade every day for 6 years. Finally, Sarah pulled back. "What do you need me to do?" And Grace told her. By mid-morning, word had spread through Whispering Creek like wildfire. Grace had sent a message to Marshal Mercier, delivered by young Timothy Clark, whose family owned the livery. The message was simple: "I will surrender the child to federal custody at noon tomorrow in the town square. I ask only that the transfer be witnessed by the town so that all may see justice done." Mercier's response came within the hour: "Agreed. Come unarmed. Any sign of resistance will be met with immediate force." People emerged from buildings, gathering in small groups to discuss this development. Some were relieved that the standoff would end without violence. Others were suspicious, knowing Grace well enough by now to recognize that surrender did not fit her pattern. Elijah found her in Miriam's kitchen, where she was carefully cleaning and oiling a revolver that definitely would not be on her person tomorrow. "This is your plan. Give yourself up and hope for mercy." "Not mercy, exposure." Grace set down the cleaning cloth, met his eyes. "I need you to do something for me, something dangerous." "Name it." "Tonight you ride to the telegraph station in Copper Ridge. 40 miles, you can make it by midnight if you push hard. You send this telegram." She handed him a carefully encoded message. "It goes to Chicago, to Director Cassidy of the Pinkerton Agency. It contains everything: Margaret's murder, Blackwell's involvement, Mercier's termination, order all of it." Elijah studied the paper. "And if it does not reach him in time, then at least we tried." Grace stood, began loading the revolver with practiced efficiency. "But I do not think it will come to that. Blackwell is arriving tomorrow. He will want to be present to make sure the job is done right. And when he is here, when he thinks he has won, that is when we spring the trap." "What trap?" Grace smiled, and for a moment Elijah saw the woman in the photograph. Cold, calculating, deadly. The best kind. The kind baited with truth. After he left, Grace walked through the town one last time. She noted positions, angles, sight lines. Where Miriam would stand with her camera, a rare and expensive device, borrowed from a traveling photographer who owed Samuel a favor. Where the journalist from the Denver Post would position himself, brought in secretly by Samuel's carefully worded telegrams. Where the townspeople would gather unknowing participants in a play that would determine whether justice or power prevailed. Every detail mattered. Every variable had to be controlled, or at least accounted for. It was the most important mission of her life, and she was executing it not with weapons but with witnesses. As she passed the church, Reverend Miller called out to her, "Grace, a word." She stopped, turned. The Reverend was a gentleman, perhaps 50, who preached forgiveness and rarely mentioned hellfire. He had welcomed her and Sarah with no questions asked. "Reverend, I have been praying for you, for the child, for this whole situation." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I do not pretend to know the full truth of what happened in Denver, but I know what I see here. A woman who loves a child who is happy and healthy, whatever the law says that has value." Grace felt something tight in her chest. "Thank you. Tomorrow, when you face whatever is coming, remember that you do not face it alone. This community, flawed as we are, we stand with you. Not all of you. No, but enough." He touched her shoulder briefly. "God sees the heart, Grace, not just the actions. I believe your heart is good. I hope that counts for something." After he walked away, Grace stood in the street feeling the weight of that blessing, unearned as it was. She thought about Artemis, who had never sought approval or forgiveness, who had operated in moral certainty that the mission justified the methods. But Grace, she needed this, needed to believe that what she was about to do was right, not just tactically sound. She walked back to the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. One more night, one more evening with Sarah. Then tomorrow, everything would change. They did not sleep. Instead, they sat by the fire, and Grace told stories, not fairy tales or children's fables, but true stories, about Margaret Blackwell, the woman Sarah had been too young to remember, but whose blood ran in her veins. Your mother was brave in a way that most people never understand. She knew speaking out against her father would likely get her killed. She did it anyway, because she believed truth mattered more than safety. Sarah, wrapped in a blanket, listened with those grave eyes. Did she know about me, that I would grow up without her? Yes. In her last moments, she knew, and she chose your future over her present. That is what love looks like sometimes, sacrifice that the other person never asked for. Like what you did, taking me. Grace was silent, her throat too tight for words. She gathered Sarah into her lap, something the girl was almost too big for now, but neither cared. They sat like that, Grace's chin resting on Sarah's head, feeling the small heartbeat against her own. "Do you know what I was most afraid of?" Grace whispered. "Not dying, not even failing. I was afraid that one day you would look at me and see only the lie, that you would realize I was not your real mother and that I had stolen your chance to know her." Sarah twisted to look up at her. "You did not steal anything. You gave me her last gift, her choice. She chose you to be my mother because she knew you would love me the way she could not stay alive to do." Grace's tears fell, then silent and unstoppable. "I do love you, more than I knew I could love anything. I know, Mama, I have always known. Yes, except I got to stay. I got to watch you grow. I got to be your mother in all the ways that matter." Grace stroked Sarah's hair, the gesture automatic after 6 years. "She gave you life, but I got to give you childhood. However strange and scattered that childhood has been, it has not been so bad. You taught me to read and to think. You taught me that being small does not mean being weak. And you taught me that family is who shows up, not who shares your name." Grace pulled her closer, blinking back tears she could not afford. Not tonight. Tonight she needed to be clear-headed, focused. But Sarah saw them anyway. "Mama, are you scared?" Honesty. Always honesty with this child. "Yes, I am terrified. Of dying, of failing you, of all of this being for nothing." Sarah, twisted in her arms, looked up with fierce determination. "It will not be for nothing, because even if tomorrow goes wrong, you saved me. You gave me 6 years of knowing I was loved. That is not nothing." And there it was, the absolution Grace had not known she needed, from the one person whose forgiveness actually mattered. They held each other as the fire burned low, as the night deepened around their small cabin, as the world outside prepared for confrontation. Finally, as midnight approached, Sarah spoke again. "Tell me about Artemis, the real story. Not the scary parts, but who she was before she became scary." So Grace did. She told Sarah about a girl who lost her parents young, who grew up in orphanages where the strong survived and the weak disappeared, who learned that emotions were weaknesses and control was survival, who caught the attention of a Pinkerton recruiter because she could track a pickpocket through crowded streets using only observation and logic. "They trained me to be a weapon, but I was good at it, so good that I stopped questioning whether I should be doing it, only how to do it better. I forgot that the people I tracked, the people I caught, they were more than just targets. They were humans who had made mistakes or who were trapped by circumstances. When did you remember? When your mother looked at me with her dying breath and trusted me with you. Suddenly, you were not a mission parameter. You were a baby who needed someone, and I realized I could choose to be more than a weapon. I could choose to be a shield instead. Sarah absorbed this in silence. Then, tomorrow will you have to be Artemis again? I will have to use what Artemis knows. The tactics, the awareness, the ability to read situations, but I will do it in service of something Artemis never understood. What is that? Love that asks for nothing in return. Dawn came too quickly and too slowly. Grace dressed carefully. No weapons visible, as agreed. But she wore a vest beneath her dress, thin leather reinforced with metal plates. Not much protection, but better than nothing. And in her boot a small knife, just in case mercy failed and necessity took over. Sarah wore her best dress, the blue one that Miriam had made for her. She looked like any other child preparing for church or a social event. Only the slight tension in her shoulders betrayed her awareness of what was coming. They walked to the town square together, hand in hand. People were already gathering, lining the boardwalks, filling windows. The entire town had turned out to witness this surrender. Miriam stood near the front, her camera set up on a tripod, the brass lens catching morning light. Beside her, a man Grace did not recognize scribbled in a notebook. The journalist. Sheriff Samuel waited in the center of the square, his expression grave, and across from him, Marshal Mercier with his 5 men, all armed, all watchful, but no Senator Blackwell, not yet. Grace stopped at the edge of the square. Sarah's hand tightened in hers. "Remember," Grace whispered, "when I say the word Falcon, you run. You do not look back. You do not hesitate." "I remember." Grace stepped forward, Sarah beside her. The crowd fell silent. Mercier moved to meet them, hand resting on his gun. "Mrs. Dunn, or should I say, Agent Artemis, you are showing remarkable sense, surrendering peacefully. I am showing remarkable faith in Justice Marshall. There is a difference. Justice will be served. The child will be returned to her family, and you will face trial for your crimes." "What crimes exactly?" Grace kept her voice calm, projected it so the gathered crowd could hear. "Saving a child from the man who murdered her mother, protecting her from being silenced to cover political corruption. You are not on trial here." "Then why does it feel like I am—" Before Mercier could respond, a commotion rippled through the crowd. People turned, parted. 3 riders entered the square, moving with the confidence of those accustomed to deference. The man in the center was perhaps 60, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing an expensive suit that looked absurdly formal in this frontier town. His face held the practiced warmth of a politician, but his eyes were cold calculation. Senator Thomas Blackwell had arrived. Grace felt Sarah flinch beside her, felt the child's recognition of the man who shared her blood but not her humanity. Blackwell dismounted with the ease of someone who had spent years campaigning on horseback. He approached slowly, his attention fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made Grace's skin crawl. "Emma," he said, his voice rich with false warmth, "my granddaughter, how you have grown." Sarah said nothing, pressed closer to Grace. "Senator Blackwell," Grace said flatly, "how kind of you to travel all this way, though I wonder why a man of your importance would personally oversee the retrieval of one small child. Family is important, Mrs. Dunn. Surely even someone like you understands that. Someone like me, a kidnapper, a murderer, a woman who destroyed 4 good men's lives to satisfy her own twisted needs." The crowd murmured. This was the narrative Blackwell had prepared, Grace realized. Turn her into the villain. Make himself the grieving grandfather seeking justice for his murdered daughter and stolen grandchild. It was a good strategy. It might even work, unless she could break it. "Tell them about Margaret," Grace said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Tell them about your daughter. How did she die? Senator, she was murdered by the same criminals she was testifying against. While under Pinkerton protection, that clearly failed her." "Interesting. Because the last time I saw Margaret, she was begging me to save Emma from you. Strange thing for a woman to say about her own father. Do you not think—" Blackwell's expression never changed, but something flickered in those cold eyes. "You are delusional. Grief and guilt have twisted your memories." "Have they?" Grace looked at Mercier. "Marshal, show him the telegram, the one authorizing my termination with acceptable civilian casualties." Mercier's hand moved toward his pocket, then stopped. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "Of course not. Just like you have no idea that Senator Blackwell has been directing your actions from the beginning. That this is not about law or justice or returning a child to her family. This is about silencing the last witness to Margaret Blackwell's murder." "These are wild accusations," Blackwell said smoothly, addressing the crowd now. "The desperate lies of a criminal facing justice. Do not let her manipulate you with conspiracy theories and slander." He was good, Grace had to admit. Reasonable, calm, the voice of authority against her desperation. But she had one advantage he did not know about. She had nothing left to lose. "Sarah," Grace said quietly, "tell them what you remember." The child stepped forward, small and fragile-looking in her blue dress. When she spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering. "I remember my mother screaming. I remember men with guns. And I remember one man standing in the doorway watching while the others killed her. He had silver hair, like yours grandfather." The word landed like a stone. Blackwell's expression finally cracked just for a moment. Surprise, then rage, then back to practiced calm. "The child is confused. She could not have been more than 2 or 3. False memories implanted by her kidnapper." "I was 3, Sarah corrected, "and I remember your voice. You said make it quick. You said it had to look like the criminals did it, not the protection detail." "Lies." "Then why are you here?" Sarah's voice rose passionate now. "If you just wanted me back, you could have sent lawyers, could have worked through proper channels. But instead you sent a marshal with orders to kill. Why would a grandfather do that?" Blackwell turned to Mercier. "Arrest them both. Now, this circus ends here." But Mercier hesitated. The crowd was murmuring louder now, doubt spreading like ripples. And in that moment of hesitation, Sheriff Samuel stepped forward. "I have something to say." His voice carried authority earned through years of service. "I commanded the Pinkerton detail in Denver. I was there when the safe house was breached. And I know that the location was leaked from within federal channels. Someone told the killers exactly where to find Margaret Blackwell." "This is absurd," Blackwell sputtered. "You have no proof." "I have testimony. 4 dying agents all saying the same thing. They were betrayed. The leak came from Washington." Samuel pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "And I have this, a signed affidavit detailing everything I witnessed, sent this morning to the Denver Post, the Chicago Tribune, and the Pinkerton Agency headquarters." The crowd's murmur became a roar. Blackwell's face went pale, then red. "You are destroying your career, Sheriff, making an enemy of people far more powerful than you." "I have already destroyed my career. 6 years ago, when I let Artemis disappear with that child because I knew it was the right thing to do, even if it was not the legal thing." Samuel's voice was steady, certain. "But I can live with that. Can you live with murdering your own daughter?" "I never." Blackwell caught himself, but too late. Grace saw the moment, the crack in his armor. She pressed forward. "You never what Senator never intended for her to die, or never expected to be held accountable. I never touched her." The words burst out, anger overriding calculation. "I never pulled a trigger. I simply made it clear to certain parties that her testimony would be problematic. What they chose to do with that information was their decision." The square fell absolutely silent. Blackwell seemed to realize what he had said. His mouth opened closed. He looked around at the crowd, at Miriam, with her camera at the journalist, scribbling frantically. "That was not... I did not mean..." But the damage was done. He had confessed in front of 200 witnesses that he had arranged his daughter's murder through deliberate inaction and implication. Mercier took a step back from his employer, hand moving away from his gun. Even federal marshals had limits on who they would protect. Then Blackwell did something desperate. He lunged for Sarah. "She is my blood, my family, you have no right." Grace moved without thinking, purely on instinct. She shoved Sarah behind her, brought her arm up to block Blackwell's grab. The motion was pure Artemis, economical, and devastating. His wrist caught against her forearm with a crack that echoed across the square. Blackwell stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You broke my wrist." He clutched his right arm to his chest. "You reached for my daughter." Grace's voice was ice and iron. "Be grateful that is all I broke." Mercier's men moved forward, but Samuel and 3 townsmen stepped between them and Grace. The journalist kept writing. Miriam's camera shutter clicked again and again. Blackwell straightened, cradling his wrist, and Grace saw the exact moment he made his final, fatal decision. His left hand, clumsy but desperate, dropped to the gun holstered on his right hip. He had to reach across his body, the motion awkward, but fear made him fast. "If I cannot have her, neither can you." Time slowed. Grace saw the gun clearing. Leather saw the barrel rising toward Sarah. She saw Mercier shout something, saw Samuel reaching for his own weapon, and she saw Sheriff Samuel Harding step directly into the line of fire. The shot echoed across Whispering Creek like the crack of doom. Samuel's staggered hand going to his chest, where blood was already spreading across his shirt. He looked surprised, almost offended. Then he fell. The square erupted. Women screamed, men shouted. Mercier's men drew their weapons, but pointed them at Blackwell, not at Grace. And Grace, moving with the deadly efficiency that had once made her legendary, closed the distance to Blackwell in 3 strides. She caught his gun hand, twisted with precise force. The weapon clattered to the ground. Then she had him on his knees, his own gun pressed against his temple. "Give me one reason," she whispered, her voice carrying to no one but him. "One reason not to end you, here and now." Blackwell's eyes were wide with fear. The politician's mask finally shattered completely. "Please, I did not mean... The gun just like you did not mean for Margaret to die, just like you did not mean for 4 Pinkerton agents to be killed. How many deaths will you not mean before someone stops you?" Her finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy. One pull. Justice delivered with gunpowder and finality. But Sarah's voice cut through the red haze of fury. "Mama, do not." Grace looked up. Sarah stood there, tears streaming down her face, but her expression was resolute. "If you kill him, you become what he said you were, a murderer. And I will have lost 2 mothers to his evil. Please, Mama, do not let him take you from me too." The words hit harder than any bullet. Grace looked down at Blackwell, saw not a powerful senator, but a broken old man who had destroyed everything he touched in pursuit of power he could not keep. She removed the gun from his temple, stepped back. "You are not worth it." Mercier moved in immediately, his men securing Blackwell with rough efficiency. "Senator Thomas Blackwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and assault. You have the right to remain silent, though." "I suspect that ship has sailed." Grace barely heard him. She was already kneeling beside Samuel, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest. Blood pulsed between her fingers, warm and insistent. "Get the doctor," she shouted. "Someone get Dr. Miller." Now, Samuel's hand found hers, gripped weakly. His eyes were clear despite the pain. "Did we get him?" "Yes, we got him. The journalist has everything. Miriam's photographs, your affidavit. It is over." "Good." His breathing was labored, wet-sounding. "The girl, Sarah, she safe?" "She is safe because of you." "Then, worth it." Samuel smiled, blood on his teeth. "Tell her, tell Emma. Her mother would be proud." "Samuel, do not. The doctor is coming. You just need to." But his eyes were already losing focus. His hand went slack in hers. And Sheriff Samuel Harding, who had spent 6 years carrying the weight of one good decision, died knowing it had mattered. Grace closed his eyes with gentle fingers, her own tears finally falling. Around her, the town had gone silent. Even Blackwell, being dragged toward the jail, had stopped struggling. Sarah knelt beside her, placed her small hand on Samuel's still chest. "He saved us." "Yes." "Will there be more like him? People who will help?" Grace looked around the square, at Miriam crying openly behind her camera, at Elijah, who had appeared from somewhere and was moving toward them, at the townspeople who had witnessed everything and whose testimony would seal Blackwell's fate. "Yes, little one, I think there will be." 1 week later, a telegram arrived at the post office addressed to Charlotte Dunn. Grace read it, standing in the afternoon sunlight, Sarah beside her, holding her hand. "Agent Artemis, Charlotte Dunn. Stop all charges dropped. Stop. Denver mission reclassified. Heroic action. Stop. Senator Blackwell indicted murder corruption. Conspiracy. Stop. Trial set Denver September. Stop. Witness protection offered for child. Stop. You are officially deceased in our records. Stop. Artemis retired. Stop. Live well. Stop. Director Cassidy. Sarah looked up at her. What does it mean? It means we are free. Truly free. The Pinkerton agency is saying I died in the confrontation. Charlotte Dunn no longer exists. Artemis no longer exists. We can stay here. We can be whoever we choose to be. Can we be Grace and Sarah? Can we stay in Whispering Creek? Grace folded the telegram, slipped it into her pocket. She looked around at the town that had welcomed them, fought for them, bled for them. At Miriam's house where they had been given shelter. At Elijah's store where kindness had been offered without price. At the church where Samuel Harding would be buried tomorrow with full honors. Yes, we can stay. That evening, Elijah found them in the small garden behind the cabin. Spring had come early, and Grace had begun planting vegetables, teaching Sarah the names of seeds and the patience required for growth. He stood awkwardly, his remaining hand clutching a small wooden box. I wanted to give you this. Now that you are staying, I wanted you to have it. Grace took the box, opened it. Inside was a simple wooden sign, beautifully carved Blackwood Garden. I thought you might want a new name, one that honors where you came from but belongs to where you are going. Blackwood was Margaret's name, Sarah's true family name, but it can be yours too if you want it. Grace ran her fingers over the carved letters. Blackwood, not Dunn the name of her orphanage, not Artemis the name of her weapon self, but Blackwood, the name of the woman who had trusted her with everything that mattered. It is perfect. There is something else. Elijah met her eyes. I know you are not ready. I know you have been through too much to think about futures beyond just surviving, but when you are ready, whenever that is, I want you to know that I see you. Not Artemis, not the legend, just Grace. Just a woman who loves her daughter and tends her garden and sometimes still wakes up checking the locks. Grace felt something in her chest tighten. Elijah, you do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Someone sees you and thinks you are worth knowing. After he left, Sarah looked up at her with knowing eyes. He likes you. I know. Do you like him? Grace considered this. Elijah Warren, who had lost a brother and an arm, but not his kindness, who had helped them knowing the risks, who saw the darkness in her past and chose to believe in her future anyway. Ask me again in a year, when I have learned to be just a woman, not a weapon. Sarah smiled. That is what you told him is not it. How did you know? Because you are terrible at hiding your feelings. For someone who used to be a spy. Grace laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. When had she last laughed like that? Not the careful, controlled sounds of someone maintaining a cover, but real laughter, born of real happiness, she could not remember. That night, after Sarah had fallen asleep, Grace stood on the small porch looking out at the hills beyond Whispering Creek. The stars were brilliant, undimmed by city lights or smoke. The air smelled of juniper and sage and the promise of rain. Somewhere in Denver, Thomas Blackwell sat in a cell awaiting trial. Somewhere in Chicago, Director Cassidy was filing papers that erased Charlotte Dunn from official existence. Somewhere in the territory, other criminals and other desperate people were making choices that would define their futures. But here, in this small cabin in this small town, Grace Blackwood was learning to simply exist. She thought about Margaret, who had given her life to save Sarah's future. About Samuel, who had given his life to protect them both. About all the people who had stood between violence and innocence, choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. And she made a promise to their memories. She would live, not just survive, but truly live. Would raise Sarah with love and laughter and all the ordinary mercies of a normal childhood. Would tend her garden and know her neighbors, and maybe someday let someone like Elijah Warren past the walls she had built. Would prove that redemption was real. That weapons could be transformed into shields. That the daughter of corruption could grow up free and whole and good. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain closer. Grace closed her eyes, felt the first drops touch her face like a benediction. Behind her, Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmured something that sounded like Mama. And Grace whispered back to the night, I am here, little one. I will always be here." 6 months later, on a clear September morning, Grace knelt in the garden with Sarah beside her. They were harvesting the last of the summer vegetables, their hands dirty with honest soil. A flower had grown wild among the carrots, white petals edged with silver. Sarah pointed to it. "What is this one called?" Grace studied it, recognized the distinctive leaves. "Artemisia. Wormwood. Beautiful, but bitter. Like you were," Grace smiled. "Like I was. But gardens change, little one. Bitter things can be pulled out, and sweeter ones planted." She did pull it out, roots and all, and tossed it onto the compost pile. In its place, she planted a seedling of lavender, fragrant and gentle. Footsteps approached, Elijah carrying a basket of bread from Miriam's kitchen. He had taken to bringing them small things, never too much, never demanding anything in return, just steady presence. "Morning, ladies." "Good morning, Mr. Warren." Sarah grinned up at him. "Mama is replanting the garden, getting rid of bitter things." "Is she now?" He looked at Grace, understanding the symbolism. "Seems like a good day for new beginnings." Grace stood, wiped dirt from her hands. She looked at this man who had chosen to see past her history, at this child who had chosen to call her mama despite knowing the truth, at this garden that represented growth instead of survival. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think it is." Sarah ran to greet Miriam, who was walking up the path with fresh eggs. The two of them disappeared into the cabin, chattering about something. Grace and Elijah stood alone in the garden, the morning sun warm on their shoulders. "You know," he said carefully, "it has been almost 8 months. Has it, since I asked you a question, about whether you might be ready someday to think about more than just surviving?" Grace looked at him fully. Really looked, not with the assessing gaze of Artemis measuring threat potential, but with the open curiosity of someone willing to be vulnerable. "And if I said I might be ready to think about it, then I would say there is no rush. We have time, all the time we need." He smiled. "But maybe we could start with supper sometime, just the 3 of us. Nothing formal, just, neighbors sharing a meal. Just neighbors. For now, until you decide we might be something more." Grace held his gaze, saw patience there, saw kindness, saw a man who understood that healing could not be rushed. "Supper sounds nice." After he left, Grace returned to her planting. But she was smiling. Really smiling. Sarah emerged from the cabin, came to stand beside her. "You like him, I might. Are you going to let yourself be happy, Mama?" Grace paused, trowel in hand. Such a simple question. Such an impossible question for someone who had spent years believing happiness was a luxury she could not afford. But looking at Sarah, healthy and safe and whole. Looking at this garden they were building together. Looking at the community that had embraced them despite everything. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I think I am going to try." They worked in companionable silence as morning stretched toward noon. In the distance, church bells rang, calling people to Sunday service. Children's laughter carried on the wind. Someone was singing the melody, drifting across the gardens and small yards of Whispering Creek. And for the first time in 6 years, Grace Blackwood allowed herself to believe that this was not temporary. This was not just another stop on an endless flight. This was home. The woman they had called Artemis the Ghost, the deadly Pinkerton agent who had never missed a target or failed a mission, was finally at peace. Not because the danger had ended. Somewhere in the world there would always be men like Thomas Blackwell, people who used power to destroy rather than protect. But because she had learned the most important lesson of all, some battles are won not with weapons but with witness, not with violence but with the stubborn insistence on living well, despite those who wish you dead. Not by becoming harder, but by allowing yourself to soften just enough to let love in. She thought about Margaret Blackwell's last words. Save her. Give her a life. Mission accomplished. And in accomplishing it, Grace had saved herself. The sun climbed higher. Sarah began to hum the same tune that drifted from town, adding her young voice to Whispering Creek's daily symphony. Grace joined her, the notes uncertain at first, then stronger. 2 voices in harmony, singing of new beginnings. In the distance, thunder rumbled, the promised rain approaching. But Grace did not hurry to gather the tools or rush Sarah inside. Instead, she tilted her face to the sky and waited. When the first drops came, they tasted like absolution. And Grace Blackwood, formerly Charlotte Dunn, formerly Agent Artemis, formerly a weapon, let herself simply be a woman standing in her garden with her daughter, grateful for rain and soil and the simple mercy of another day. The ghost had found rest at last, and in that peace had discovered who she truly was. The end.